Welcome to today's members virtual session with Chris from Magic Little Grants. Really looking forward to hearing about the opportunities for this across governing bodies and our wider member network. We are recording this session in order that this can be shared with our members and our network, and that they can share this with their network. So we're looking forward to hearing all about the grants and the Q&A that will follow this. So without further ado, can I hand over to Liz, our partnerships executive?
Thank you, Kim. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this opportunity to look at mechanisms for fundraising and income for the club level in sport in Scotland. I'm delighted to welcome Chris Breeze from localgiving.com, who's going to talk to us about the opportunity that platform gives for fundraising in general, both for sports governing bodies and club level, and more specifically, the opportunity that exists currently in respect of Magic Little Grants, an opportunity for clubs to make application to get hands-on income through a grant, which will be very welcome, I'm sure, at the current time, as it always is, but particularly currently. So, Chris, without further ado, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. It is a pleasure to be able to present to all of you, and I'm very much looking forward to your questions at the end. For those receiving this webinar as a recording, I will include an email address by which I can be reached afterwards. I'd be delighted to hear from you as well with any questions you may have. I'm going to venture to share my screen and try out my technical skills, so please bear with me. And then I'll talk a little bit about local giving, what we do, the Magic Little Grant we're offering, which is really tailored towards grassroots and sporting clubs and non-profit organisations. I'll run you through end-to-end the whole process. So without further ado, let me see if I can present my screen. Have we got it?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Chris.
Excellent. Wonderful. So here we go. Today I'm going to talk about local giving and the Magic Little Grant scheme we're offering to organisations across Great Britain. So first, a little bit of background on myself. My name is Christopher Breeze. I head up the business development and customer success at Local Giving. Now, what that means is I look after our new members, help them with their fundraising, by organising advice, whether that's one-to-one on a call or through webinars that I present to our wider members. I also look at ways that we can develop the offering that we make to our customers, to all charitable organisations, whether they're registered, unregistered, community amateur sporting clubs, community interest companies, etc. So part of what I'm doing in my role is looking after the Magic Little Grant, which is a £500 grant on offer to organisations of any kind. I'll get onto that in a moment, but first of all, just a summary of what we do. Local Giving has been operating for about 10 years. It's an online fundraising platform, and we're really tiered towards local grassroots charities and community groups. Unlike other fundraising platforms, we have a very active help desk and a phone line that you can call us even now when we're all working at home. So we really emphasize providing training, mentoring, and support for organizations to help raise extra funds. Most of the time, I find the organizations that come on board are very much new to online fundraising. So a typical activity for one of my sort of team members would be teaching somebody who's never used Facebook before how to set up an online Facebook account and start marketing their activities and driving social traffic towards fundraising pages. So we've supported thousands of groups to raise millions of pounds of funding. And we also contribute actively into discussions around the voluntary sector. So we produce reports based on research that we carry out and advise on all sorts of things. At the moment, Local Giving is one of the official partners for Small Charities Week, and we're looking to continue this kind of advocacy work in the future. So the Magic Little Grants were started in 2017. in conjunction with the Postcode Community Trust. Now, the Postcode Community Trust is a charitable organisation that's funded by the players of the People's Postcode Lottery. So they, in conjunction with us, have come together to offer a £500 grant that any organisation can apply to, both members of local giving and non-members of local giving. Essentially, it's designed to fund projects that are supporting or encouraging activity in their general nature. I'll elucidate on some general, typical applications we might be receiving this year to paint a picture a little bit later. Also happy to take questions from groups as to, would this sort of application be appropriate? It's a simple process, which I'll outline, I believe, in the next slide. Essentially, it's a paragraph writing about, what the organisation would spend the grant on. Alongside that, of course, we have some validating and vetting information, which we go into detail about on our website, and I'll send links afterwards so people can find this. So over the next 6 months through to the 31st of October, we assess applications on a monthly basis. So at the sort of end of each month, we look at all the applications we've received, we vet them. If some need more information or specific details to get them across the line, we'll get in contact with organisations. We're quite proactive about this. And we then submit them to a funding review board. So typically within 6 weeks of application, a group can receive £500 of unrestricted grant funding for a project of their choosing. Alongside that, successful organisations who are not already members of local giving will receive 1 year of funded membership to local giving, courtesy of the Postcode Community Trust. And as part of that, I'm going to be looking after a programme of sort of education and outreach to these new onboarded members to bring them up to speed in online fundraising. The typical member of local giving raised over £2,000 last year in online donations. I think now more than ever, with the current period of social distancing, online fundraising is coming to the forefront of many organisations' strategy. So we're really kind of pulling out all the stops to meet that increased demand and focus, and are delighted to help all of our members start their online fundraising journey or optimize what they're already doing. So there's a few criteria in terms of the scope of the grants that we're awarding and in terms of eligibility for organizations. The fund will be awarding over 900 grants to community projects. It's running until the 31st of October 2020, but obviously first come, first served, pretty much, with an understandable bar for quality. But we seem to be on pace to be having fundraising rounds through the summer. It's not in any danger of funding all groups in the next 2 months or anything like that. But the sooner the better, because it will give you more time to refine applications if you're an applying group. So successful projects, as I mentioned, will support and inspire people to participate in sports or exercise. And unregistered groups, charities, community interest companies, or CASCs can apply as part of the local giving sign-up process, which all organisations go through. We'll validate and vet to make sure that organisations are genuinely charitable in their aims, so on and so forth. So in terms of eligibility for the grant, organisations must have an annual turnover under £250,000 or be in their first year of operation. They must operate in England, Scotland, or Wales only. And if they are already receiving funding from the players of the People's Postcode Lottery and haven't completed their project or returned monitoring forms for the project, they'd need to wrap that up first before we could fund them again for something separate. Lastly, I know it may not be of direct relevance to your member organisations, but organisations linked to a school, such as parent-teacher associations, are not eligible as per the criteria set to us by the Postcode Community Trust. So if you have a school sports team, unfortunately, those wouldn't be eligible for this grant. Of course, happy to take questions upon boundaries, and when in doubt, please do get in touch with us. So I'll briefly overview the sort of workflow that a charity would go through. So a charity would first sign up on a link on our website, which we'll share at the end of this presentation. a charity completes our validation process, or a charitable organisation. So if the organisation is a registered charity, we'll look at their Companies House or OSCR filing for details, and we'll also take a bank statement that we can verify and match to their group so that the grant can be paid out to them. Once they've registered their details with us, the charity will complete their Magic Little Grant application. And this really is a series of check boxes and about a paragraph saying who the project's going to help, what the funding is going to be used for, just so we can pass that in front of our funding board. We evaluate those applications. If we are missing any details or need further clarification, we'll come back to organisations. We really want to fund groups. We want to provide good applications for our funding panel to review. So we're happy to provide feedback in that sense before a panel. Once that's done, we'll send the applications off to our panel. They'll review, groups will be notified of outcome, and the funding will be paid within 2 weeks for the panel if successful. And monitoring emails will be sent out 6 weeks after the funding is received, where they talk about what their success of their project. If it's taken place, of course, we don't expect to receive monitoring forms until a project's been completed. Once an organisation has been funded, they become a member of Local Giving, and they'll have access to a range of services. So our help desk, which is staffed during all office hours, which includes a helpline which people can call for direct advice and support. We have fundraising guides and resources, both accessible within our accounts for our charity members, but also which will proactively send out based on performance data of the account, depending on how they're doing on fundraising. We run webinars to advise people. Recently, we've given advice on how to set up a coronavirus response appeal and how to engage fundraisers digitally. And we're also happy to work one-to-one with organizations to set a plan around fundraising and their calendar, so we can coordinate and figure out how to maximize their chances of raising funds. It's really quite a customizable process depending on the needs of the charity. We're always happy to hear about requests for features that we can help to develop. I personally enjoy very much learning from organizations, being slightly newer to the sector myself, about how we can tailor to their needs and meet the challenges of grassroots in a very, very kind of dynamic, changing landscape at the moment. So in terms of results, I'll break down just simply how last year went. We funded 917 organizations. There's about a 70% success rate for applications. Over half of the groups were not existing members of Local Giving. So some members of Local Giving have received the grant before and apply again for a different project, for example. And that's completely allowed and successful. But obviously, we're very much looking to engage with new groups, to have a diversity of organizations, both in terms of locale, in terms of the demographics of the groups they support, and also the causes. It's nice to have a bit more variety than 900 football clubs, but also there are many causes worth funding. So we just want to really put out there our link to apply and see what comes back. We strongly encourage as many people to apply as possible. So 80% of the grants were distributed in England, 12% in Scotland, and 8% in Wales. That's roughly in line with where there's the greatest concentration of the players of the Postcode lottery. We were very happy to have funded an organisation in every postcode last year, which was a challenge that we set for ourselves to make sure we properly represent the geography of Great Britain. So many of our organisations who receive the grant go on to engage with our fundraising support actively. Getaway Girls funded instructors for an activity zone, and also have made use of our fundraisers feature, whereby anyone can sign up for your organisation to raise money on your behalf. Donations are eligible for gift aid, even if you're an unregistered group, as the donations are processed through the Local Giving Foundation, which is a charitable organisation. So we take care of gift aid claims on behalf of our member organisations. So they raised an additional £375, and they continue to engage with us on fundraising through their default charity page to this day. Other organisations currently have launched crowdfunding appeals, which I'd be very happy to take questions on, but I'd encourage you heartily to look at the local giving page. At the current time, it's early May 2020, we have direct appeal campaign pages for organisations who are responding to the pressures placed on them by coronavirus. So you can see the work we're doing and the work our organisations are doing to reach out and secure funding in the current challenging circumstances. So, in summary, the simplest thing that we could do after this presentation is, one, I'd love to hear your questions either in person now or by contacting help@localgiving.org, and you can make out the email you send across for the attention of Chris. I'd encourage you to share this presentation with your member organisations and encourage them to apply today via the link I placed there. If they have any questions as well, we have our helpline and the email address I've indicated there. They should get in contact. I'd love to see more applications from Scotland across the range of sports and sporting groups that you have. And I'd very much like to sort of see the floor and take some questions, if that's okay.
Thanks, Chris. Very much appreciated, and I'm sure people will have lots of questions. I'm sure you've stimulated some thought there. If that's okay, I might use Chair's privilege to just clarify two things, if I may, Chris. The point, I know you've used charities through it, but you clarified at the beginning that this is open to organisations that aren't charities. So the vast majority of sports clubs in Scotland are unincorporated organisations, but as I understand it, that does mean they can still apply for your grants. Is that correct?
Absolutely. We do have some validation requirements, such as a copy of the club's constitution and, if possible, a copy of accounts they have, or a relatively informal budget showing ingoings and outgoings. But we work with many unregistered organisations, and that's in essence, a large part of the target audience for this grant.
That's news, I think, to everybody's ears, Chris, because I think that's so often the challenge for sporting organisations. So many thanks. The other thing I just wanted to ask you, and it was one of the reasons that we initially heard about local giving, actually, was you talked about gift aid. So again, because lots of sports organisations aren't charities, they don't have access to gift aid. So the grants in their own right are super exciting, but the opportunity to access gift aid is a new opportunity, I think, for many organisations. Could you just talk a little bit more about that and how that works, Chris, please, before we throw open to questions from the floor?
Absolutely, and this is a very valid point to raise. It's one of the key advantages of the way in which local giving is set up. So local giving works directly with HMRC to claim gift aid on behalf of our member organisations. So in effect, when a donation is made on our platform, it is made to the Local Giving Foundation, who then pass on that donation to the member organisation in whose name the donation was made, as unrestricted grant funding. So if a donation is eligible for gift aid and a donor claims it, we work that out with HMRC, we cover all the forms. Even if your organisation is an unregistered amateur sporting association, it's possible to get gift aid. Now, it's worth bearing in mind the regulations around gift aid. There are things for which you can claim it and things for which you cannot. To give some examples, and you should look on the HMRC website as well for further clarity. You can't pay for membership fees for a club and claim gift aid on those because you're receiving a benefit. And similarly, you can't receive something in return, such as tickets to a game. You can't claim gift aid on those. But if it's a goodwill donation made by a member of the public and you're not receiving a direct benefit from it, if they make the donation in their own name, then it's absolutely eligible for gift aid. And I'd be happy to take any further questions on this as well. I recognise it can be a slightly confusing area sometimes, this aspect of local giving claiming gift aid, as donations are part of the Local Giving Foundation.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for being really clear on that. And I think gift aid's 25%, isn't it? So there's a huge opportunity for additional income. And I know one of the issues that governing bodies have been raising about both your own work, but about the work of sports clubs across Scotland as well, is that many organisations, although events may not be run, people still want to donate. their event entry money or, you know, their membership money as donations, you know, even though they may not be able to still participate in those events, and a network like this would allow potentially people to create or to generate gift aid off the back of that as well. So maybe just something that answers some of the questions members have previously raised with us. So open floor, guys. Great opportunity to ask Chris some questions. So who'd like to chip in first?
Yeah, Chris, can I just ask a quick question about, you said that it's limited to organisations that only operate in Scotland, England and Wales. We're a charity for disabled skaters, and we've got branches in Scotland, England and Wales. We've also got branches, for example, in Ireland, but we can separate them out. Does that still fit your criteria?
Absolutely, that does, yes. The applying organisation or kind of chapter of your organisation would need to be based in one of Wales, England or Scotland. Unfortunately, Northern Ireland isn't eligible. But if the activities that the grant is going to fund are based in Great Britain itself, then that's absolutely fine, clear to apply.
Fantastic. Can I just also add, I love the way that you've got the fundraising training, because that's one of the difficulties that we've got when we're trying to train up volunteers to be able to continue activities. So I think it's an amazing resource. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Honestly, it's very valuable for us as well to have regular contact with people who are on the front lines, being scrappy and innovative. I find it one of the most rewarding parts of my job, just to get to talk to somebody who's entirely into the digital sphere and get to run through things. So yeah, for all members who are considering applying to local giving, if you come on board, please give me a ring. I'd love to walk you through online fundraising as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Margarita and Chris. That's super. You mentioned in the summary for 2019 that you had 40 priority areas that you managed to fund projects across. Do those priority areas exist in 2020 as well? And can you tell us anything more about those? So
in terms of priority areas, those have not yet been communicated to us this year. I believe there was a slight shift in terms of overall strategy in the aftermath of sort of coronavirus impacting things. And now there's more of a general approach to making sure we have even coverage of the postcodes. That's the main aspect. In previous years, there's been an alignment of where the Postcode Community Trust wants to fund, being sort of aligned with where most of the players are. At this stage, all I would say is we are encouraging as many applications as possible. We have the grant funding, we're looking to distribute it, and we just encourage people to apply as soon as possible, and then we'll see where the cards fall.
Thanks, Chris. And just one other quick one was, if people are unsuccessful, do they get feedback, or is there a way for them to sort of tweak an application? You know, is that quite an interactive or iterative process? Or is it, you know, I imagine capacity must be a challenge from the point of view of your team. How does that work? Capacity
is a challenge. We normally will, before a funding panel, try to provide feedback to a group. For example, occasionally we'll see a group submit a really great application, but we'll notice their accounts are currently overdue with the Charity Commission or OSCR, if they're a registered charity, for example. So we'll get in touch with them and say, hi, unfortunately for this funding round, you wouldn't be eligible to receive funding because of this issue with your accounts, but why don't we give you the time to get this sorted, and then we'll put in your application once it's ready. We'll submit people for the funding panel once we've had the chance to kind of course correct a little bit on things like that. Obviously, there's not every scenario in which we can give feedback. If something's completely out of scope, then it is out of scope. But especially in the earlier stages, we have more time to adapt and fund. If we're looking more at October, November, we're going to be more pressed for time. But the sooner you put in an application, the more time we'll have to devote to an organisation to help get them across the line. Great, thanks, Chris. Liz, were you going to come in there?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Chris, we have focused on Magic Leap Grant, and you've obviously talked about the fact that the grant by default gives organisations membership of local giving and the benefits. And, you know, as Margarita said, fantastic support in terms of fundraising. I wondered if you could say a little bit more about simply becoming a member of local giving, rather than necessarily just a via the Magic Little Grant process, so that we're clear about that opportunity as well, because it sits and stands by itself as a mechanism to help organisations support their fundraising generally. So I just thought it would be helpful if you could just maybe cover that in a little bit more detail.
Absolutely. I'll happily come back for further questions on this point. So a standard membership for local giving, all members applying go through the same validation process as organisations going through this Magic Little Grant sign up. The difference is that a year's membership to local giving costs £96. As I said, the typical organisation on average made over £2,000 last year on our platform. It's the same validation checks. So if you're a registered charity, looking at your filings on the Charity Commission or OSCR, and looking at a bank statement, which we can verify to match it to your organisation. If you're an unregistered organisation, the documents I mentioned, such as a copy of the Constitution and formal or informal accounts. Functionally, we would prefer that people, if they fit the criteria, apply via the Magic Little Grant, because we'd love for organisations at this time to have a leg up and a help. It can be an initial cost that for an organisation with no income at the current time, so a grassroots sporting club, especially now that no sporting activity is really ongoing, it can be a blocker to accessing online fundraising, the sign-up fees that organisations have. So the Magic Little Grant is a cost-free way to get in there, and that's why we'd really push that. Though obviously we'd welcome more applications. If you feel yourself ineligible to apply for the grant, you can get in touch with us, help@localgiving.org, with any questions an organisation particularly has about their application. Membership fee is, as I said, £96, and we treat our normal members the same as our Magic Little Grant members. They all are eligible for the support we can give. We want you guys to succeed long term, and we're hoping to set you guys up for success with onboarding programs in the first 3-6 months, and then ongoing support after then to adjust to the changing circumstances in which we might find ourselves down the road in terms of fundraising.
Thank you.
Great, excellent point, Liz. Thanks, Chris. Any other questions for Chris at this stage? Hi, Lisa. Yeah.
Hi, thank you very much, Chris, for the presentation. Much appreciated. And my question is probably around the fact that we're not getting back out as quickly as we would like at the moment, in terms of, activity can't take place as much. You gave a couple of ideas of things that we could use the £500 maybe towards, but is it okay? Or my two parts of my question are: is how long do you need to spend the grant within? So can we apply now for something maybe for April next year? And two, if we apply for something, say for September, and it doesn't happen because we're still tighter in restrictions than we think, then what kind of, how do we work with you guys to ensure that we can continue to support the clubs?
Great.
Thanks. Yeah, this is an excellent point to raise, and something I should have clarified earlier. So thank you very much. So originally, the timescale for the grant was that the hope was that an organisation funded would be able to use their funding for a project within the next 12 months, which already was flexible to a good degree. Obviously, circumstances have changed in the past few months, and now there is a very pronounced degree of flexibility as to organisations that are funded. We've had many organisations from 2019 who received funding in November, planning to do activities this summer. Obviously, they've had to postpone, possibly even as far as next spring or summer. So they've gone beyond the 12-month window. And what we would ask is that we notice if you haven't spent your grant or return monitoring, we'll send out nudge emails just to check in with all of our groups at the moment and see if something had to be cancelled. For example, we've reworked many yoga classes which have been done by wellness organisations to take place in an online format. It's possible to rework projects. Ideally, for ease and for general forward planning, it would be wonderful if organisations were realistic about what they apply for in terms of funding. An organisation applying for a football tournament to happen in 2 months' time, we have to come back to them on that, because obviously it's not that practical. But we're not actually asking for specifics about the dates in applications at the moment. So if there's an activity, we are happy to really be flexible and work things out. Honestly, it's almost hard to answer the question, because we will react to things on an ad hoc basis, but there is a very strong degree of leniency and of willingness from ourselves and the Postcode Community Trust to adapt and be flexible, because grassroots organisations are having to be, so we need to meet that kind of adaptation.
Great question, Lisa, and thanks, Chris. It's super to hear of a funding partner that understands that flexibility. I know a lot of funding partners are trying to do exactly that, but it's great to hear. Good stuff. Any other questions, folks? Andy?
Question from me, yeah. So, and thanks, Chris, really, really useful. And in a way, I'm thinking, well, there should be a flood of applications now as we start to communicate this. But I guess, I always try and find what's the catch to some of this. And often there's some quite detailed criteria around a project being completely new, additional, some we've never done before, but we know will have huge success rates. But actually, the stuff on your website is in a way quite vague. Your planned project must encourage people to participate in sports and exercise with the primary aim of improving physical health. And I think, well, that's really generic. And how detailed do you need people to be? You talked about just one paragraph. So this sounds like it could be, the opportunities here are quite open. Is that right?
I would say they are open. Yeah, there are a few more examples of eligibility on the Magic Little Grants application page, which I linked to. Okay. So far this year, I'll throw a few things out at you. I've had an organisation apply and be successful to fund new kit for a girls' team that they were starting up. I've had tennis organisations seeking to cover ongoing costs they have with pitch hire and electricity running costs. I've had groups starting up online exercise classes, paying for website administration fees, yoga instructor fees, and marketing for wellness courses they're marketing online. There's really a large element of flexibility there. We've funded dance, we've funded horse riding. We are really quite open. The proviso would be that it's focusing on physical health and well-being through exercise and removing barriers there. So in general, there have been organizations that have come close and we can tell they have activities we can fund that haven't been exactly on brief. There was an organization that wanted to fund mental health workshops, which I think are obviously incredibly deserving of funding, but didn't fit within exactly quite the brief we wanted. And we tailored and adapted in a way to fund other projects they were working on, which fell within the grant. And obviously £500 towards something there that they were going to do anyway frees up £500 of their own fundraising that they can then use towards their mental health project. So we want to fund organizations. We really do. As long as we have grant money to fund, we'll find a way with organizations to help them devise a project. Obviously, the better prepared organizations are, the more chance they have due to just purely time constraints.
Yeah, excellent. That sounds brilliant. Thanks very much.
Always good, Chris, to have an organisation that wants to give away money. I'm delighted to introduce an organisation that wants to give away money right now. That's fantastic. Chris, the only thing I would add to your comment, and it is a very small proviso, Andy, was that clearly, Chris, you explained that I think in your introduction, you said that people could apply a number of times. Quite clearly, you have said to me, you wouldn't be making a repeat application. So for the same activity. So clearly, once funding's received for that once, it can't then be a series of ongoing applications for that same thing again. Clearly, it can be something different, but it can't be the same.
Ideally, there would be some variety. There's some leeway here. If an organisation needs funding for ongoing costs, we understand that their needs as an organisation may be developing. We've had some organisations who've applied for funding to replace patio furniture 1 year and then want to replace some more patio furniture. I'd encourage a bit more sort of development and engagement with our fundraising to cover things like that. In general, yeah, we would love to see some variety in terms of things, but we do want to fund groups, especially now. We just need to verify that their aims and their outcomes are going to really deliver results for the Postcode Community Trust. And that's not something that can be empirically defined. It's something that's worked out on a case-by-case basis.
Chris, would it be possible for us to, just picking up the point Andy made about potentially a flood of applications, which I'd be delighted to see, do we have a means by which we can think about recording, the progress in Scotland in terms of applications and getting some feedback around that? I think that'd be kind of quite helpful.
It's something that
in the fullness of time, clearly.
Yeah. It's something that I'll be keeping tabs on out of personal interest, having obviously started to establish this relationship. I, as of yet, the Postcode Community Trust essentially have said to us, send us what you've got, we'll update you. So it's something that's going to be worked out. We've only just submitted the second funding panel this week.
Right.
We sent applications off to them. So it's still really early days in the cycle of this round of grant giving. So I would encourage a lot of applications. It may well be that in receiving so many applications from Scotland, it will outline the development potential that we have to support organisations at the grassroots. And that may lead to an expansion of the grant giving programme in future years. It may also lead to more concentrated support that local giving can offer to organisations such as the ones that your members represent.
Fantastic.
So it takes 5 minutes, and at the very least, it brings people close to online fundraising. And we'll be delighted to have a chat with them about that.
Thank you, Chris. There's a call to action to help Chris and his team outline the development potential. I like that very much. Margarita, did you have a question there? Were you going to come in?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about whether or not it was possible to ask for something that's going to be effectively part of something. So say, for example, the website, and we've got a new learning management system. So we've got the running costs, the operational costs on an ongoing basis. And that's quite a big thing for us as a very small charity to fund. But between those two things, they probably come to about £750. So is it okay if we ask for the £500 as a contribution to the total cost of running those two digital platforms?
Absolutely. I believe this should be in writing in the eligibility criteria on our webpage. But in essence, what we'd ask is that the £500 grant makes up 10% or more of a total project budget. So in theory, we could fund things of a value up to £5,000. We'd ask that if it becomes kind of evident through the text description of a project, that costs may be, high and around that region, we'd ask that you just briefly outline what the budget is. So we don't have to come back and ask. Just checking, is this under £5,000 in budget?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great.
Thank you.
Useful clarification. Absolutely. Any other questions there? I'll pop another one in, Chris, if that's okay. So you mentioned eligibility around organisations, which I think is very clear, and certainly on the back of Andy's question is very much music to people's ears. So often that it can't, as Andy said, be for ongoing projects. It's always about something new, which, at the end of the day, the 13,000 sports clubs across Scotland run week in, week out in normal times, I accept. So the idea of having to come up with something new to find ongoing or support ongoing activities isn't necessarily ideal. So really welcome your approach to that. Is there a question of the eligibility of what can be funded? So I know that sometimes there might be, for organisations, there might be equipment that's an ongoing equipment, or there might be equipment which, if it was some of Fiona's members at Horse Scotland, it might be helping to feed the horses, like you were saying, through a challenging time at the moment, where something might be disposable but is required throughout this time. Is there eligibility criteria about what you can spend the grant on?
I would say, in general, the ongoing guiding principle is things that remove barriers to sporting participation. There are certainly things which I'd say are easier to fund, but not exclusively funded. Equipment purchase being one of them. It's very simple. The simplest application for us to receive would be a sporting team that needs £500 to buy a new kit or a new set of goalposts. But that's not just what this grant is for. It's not just for those simple wins. So we have had organisations, you know, seeking the contributions to ongoing running costs. If, for example, you're trying to feed some horses, what I would recommend for people applying to do would be to outline a certain time period, and outline in their grant application, let's say, to in this current period of social distancing, when fundraising is difficult, £500 would cover the nutrition costs and support and upkeep of our horses, to enable continued resumption of services once the coronavirus impact has diminished and allowed us to resume normal activities. So it is fully possible. You do have as much space as you need in terms of writing your application to justify it. If we're unclear on something, we'll flag it up for, you know, further info needed, and we'll come back and talk to you. So I'd say if there's something you want funded, give us a try. We have the capacity to come back to you and clarify if we need further information. And if there's something that you really need funded, the last thing you want to do is have organisations, you know, buying, you know, new kit that they might need to use in 5 years because they want to spend the grant money on something when there's something they can actually get and use now. So, you know, we'd love for you to apply, and if we can't fund one thing, we'll help you retarget it. But we'd love to actually get to what you want funded. And if it's going to reduce, you know, barriers to sporting and exercise access, then we'd love to hear about it.
Thanks, Chris. That's great. Any other questions? Bless you, Fiona. Bless you. Any other questions from anybody else? If I can maybe ask one last one, Chris. You mentioned about support for ongoing costs, and that's been a big challenge that our members have raised about their members over the current and very challenging time that obviously everybody's facing. So while there are a lot of funds available at the moment that support to organisations across the voluntary sector that are helping the fight against COVID, or are at imminent risk of closure, or are supporting organisations that own or lease facilities, there are very few, it seems at the moment, support mechanisms available for clubs that don't fit into any of that, or indeed that don't own or lease facilities. So when you mentioned there's support for ongoing costs at this time, is there anything that you can add into that? I think that'll be a particular opportunity that people might see at the moment. So just if you'd any guiding thoughts on that, that would be really helpful.
Of course, I do want to clarify this point, because I think it is important that we do understand that there are many ongoing issues related to the survival of organisations here, and we would like to help fund organisations as we can. There possibly may have been slight miscommunications, aspects of things. We aren't targeting this Magic Little grant as a survival fund for organisations in the grassroots at this stage. So we would encourage, if you're thinking about ongoing costs you have associated to a sporting team, a typical example of this that we'd have to clarify when I mention ongoing costs would be at XYZ Football Club, we run a youth girls team. We have ongoing costs in terms of instructor hire, pitch hire fees, and maintenance, power electricity costs for the floodlights at our training sessions in the evenings. We'd be seeking to have this grant to cover a part of a year's maintenance and upkeep costs for this team. So there is a slight element of framing that aligns it with the club's activities, and functionally, I'd say this, you know, this aligns with the survival and ongoing when people can get back to things. What we'd encourage is that people apply for these kind of associated costs with activity in more of a positive sense, and if they stand a better chance of receiving the grant that way. And upon receiving the grant, they get a year's membership to local giving. And then we have many organisations who set up survival appeals on local giving. And that is what we'd encourage people to do. That's probably the best way to be successful in a grant application for costs that you can outline that have kind of a future to them in some way. Receive the grant and then use our membership and use my team to help guide you towards online fundraising, and use that as your ongoing kind of survival appeal. You know, there is a flexibility to what we can fund, but there to outline, with some realism, obviously in terms of determining results, organizations stand a better chance of receiving the grant if they can outline projects, specific costs, even if it's an existing project that they work on an ongoing basis, and ongoing costs with those. That would stand the best chance of providing a route forward and a membership, which then provides the appeal funding for the survival element of an organisation.
Thanks, Chris. That's really helpful clarification. And I think a lot of the feedback that our members have been raising is that there's a huge number of sports clubs out there that have very exciting exit plans, for want of a better phrase. So knowing that when they can welcome people back into their sporting environment, they've got exciting programs or activities that they'd like to do, but they're not quite sure how they almost launch fund that. And that sounds like that would be a really great opportunity to bring together their opportunities with the funding that might be available. So I think that fits in really nicely to what I think is a bit of a gap, but where I think there's a huge amount of opportunity and enthusiasm amongst the sector.
Absolutely. We'd be delighted to help give groups something to look forward to. Wonderful phrase. Okay, Liz, were you going to come in there?
I think it's been extremely valuable, Chris. And we've covered a lot of ground and really explored the issues, and I think it's great to hear of the opportunity, not just in respect of the immediate £500 grants, which clearly I'm sure everybody on the call and those who may hear this recording will be keen to pursue, but also that opportunity to really build capacity and capability around online fundraising generally, and really good point about using the opportunity or the challenge that we currently have, as a launch pad for, something bright in the future, both in terms of the immediate funding and kind of longer term, to help organisations receive and make use of those donations. And in particular, as you said at the beginning, Kim, the opportunity to really expand that gift aid opportunity to those for whom it's been a challenge to date. So without further ado, thank you very much, Chris. I'm sure you will receive applications and we will be in touch again in order to make sure that we can launch from here forward. And if anybody wants to contact me in relation to anything they've heard today or connect with Chris to take this further, delighted to hear from anybody and to help in any way. So thank you, Chris.
That's super. So many messages popping up on the chat box of everybody saying thank you, Chris. So thank you enormously, everybody. Much appreciated. Take care.